Hey everyone, welcome to the E2 Effective Elders podcast. Visit us at e2elders.org and please share this good word with others.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining us once again for the E2 Effective Elders podcast. And as always, we say thanks to CDF Capital for making this podcast possible. We're so grateful for our long-term partnership with them. 2022, we have devoted this whole year to what we call a good word. And as we think about this, January was this word, surrender. And as we worked through January, we heard many good things said about that word surrender. Then in February, that month of love, we moved into this word compassion. And we heard many good things about how we can be the hands and the feet of Jesus to people. Now, in the month of March, every month in this 2022 year, there's a different word. So the month of March, we're going to be unpacking the word courage. And it just seems as if we're living in a day and age when we need a whole lot of courage. The opposite of courage is fear. And for whatever the reason, people are living in fear. The media, for example, right now is specializing in stoking, in peddling fear. Case in point, COVID. Time after time, we heard news reports that stirred within people fear. Fear of contracting the virus, fear that children would contract the virus, that aging parents would contract and possibly die of the virus. So fear from the early months of 2020 has only been stoked by the media. And it's not just with regard to COVID-19. The economy, with this raging inflation, not only the economy, but what's happening internationally, Ukraine, Russia, China, Taiwan, North Korea. The list is endless as to how we fear what is happening around us. And we, whether we are elders in the church, staff in the church, ladies who are helping to lead women of faith in the church, we need courage today. A great deal of courage. One of the most recurring commands in the Word of God is this command to fear not. Fear not. As a matter of fact, one of the most common recognizable moments when that was said was when the angels appeared to the shepherds on the night of the birth of Jesus. Fear not, for behold, we bring you tidings of great joy that will be to all the people. Fear not. And we want to be a people who take seriously that command. There's no need to fear. Perfect love casts out all fear. 1 John 4, verse 18. So what we want to do is talk about how can we be men and women of increasing courage, And there's a simple answer as to how we can move into the direction of courage. Let's open our Bibles to the Gospel of Matthew. The Gospel of Matthew. And what we're going to do is look at a moment in the life of the disciples when they feared. They were expected to do something, and their immediate response was one of worry, anxiety, panic, of fear. And you'll recognize the passage, I'm sure. As a matter of fact, this is one of the many miracles that Jesus performed. And it's not only one of his many miracles, it's the only miracle that is recorded in all four Gospels. And it might be that already you're calling it to mind. It would be the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. Now, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all bring to it different pieces of information. They each bring to it, just like if there were four witnesses standing on four corners of an intersection, and they saw an accident happen in that intersection, there would be four different angles of what just took place. Similarly, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they bring a very interesting nuance to what they see in the miracle of Jesus. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 14. Now, as we work through, we're going to come to a place where we make a discovery as to how we can indeed exhibit and actually experience increasing courage in our lives as people who are serving others within the body of Christ, as well as those who are yet to come to Christ. So here we are. If you'll notice in Matthew 14, beginning in verse 3, we read of the account of how Herod had John the Immerser, John the Baptist, arrested, imprisoned, and eventually executed. And at the end of that passage, after John was beheaded in prison, verse 11, his head was brought in on a platter, given to the girl. She carried it to her mother. John's disciples, verse 12, came and took his body and buried it. Then they went and told Jesus. Now remember, Jesus was related to John. They were relatives. And in the very next verse, chapter 14, verse 13, when Jesus heard what had happened, he withdrew by boat privately to a solitary place. Why did he do that? Because Jesus, remember, he himself experienced pain. He's human like we are. He was human in every way as we are. He had emotion. And in this moment, Jesus is grieving the death of John, his relative, a death that was violent. And Jesus is wanting to get alone to a solitary place so that he can grieve. Now, when he goes there, notice what happens. Hearing of this, the crowds followed him on foot from all of the towns. Now, this is happening at the Sea of Galilee, and the Sea of Galilee was surrounded by villages, by towns. People would live along the shore of the Sea of Galilee, so they had fresh water and they had fresh food, fish. And so the people, when they saw Jesus sail across the Sea of Galilee, what they do? They went on foot to meet him where his boat came ashore. And it says right here, when Jesus landed, he saw a large crowd. So there were a whole bunch of people. As a matter of fact, we read a little bit later on, it says right down here, verse 21, the number of those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides women and children. So you give each one of those 5,000 guys a wife. Some of them had more than one wife. You give them 3.7 children per family. What we have is easily a crowd that could have been 12, 15,000 or more in size. So there were a whole bunch of people, many, many people. And what we want to see here is that Jesus had compassion on them. And he healed their sick. And not only did he heal their sick, but it says here that as evening approached, they're going to be fed. So what we see here is the fact that these thousands of people, they had problems. A lot of them. Can you imagine the boat of Jesus is coming up on shore, and people are running out into the water to him, holding their sick children. Here, heal my baby, heal my child. People going out who are blind, heal me. There were people who would have greeted him as he's coming ashore with all of their pain, all of their problems, and Jesus had compassion on them and healed their sick. Now, as evening approached, the disciples came to him and said, "This is a remote place. It's already getting late." In other words, the sun is beginning to set. Send the crowds away so that they can go to the villages and buy themselves some food. Now, think with me for a moment. We have to understand that one of the problems that people had in that day happened to be hunger. People lived in a survivalist culture. The clothes that they had were on their back. They didn't have closets full of a spring wardrobe, a winter wardrobe, a summer wardrobe. When their clothes wore out, then they hoped that they would find more clothes to wear, a new tunic, a new cloak. And not only were they in a survivalist culture for that, but even for food. They were concerned. They didn't have pantries and deep freezers and cupboards full of food. They tried to work for one more day to get enough food for one more day to keep their wives and their children alive for one more day. And they didn't eat 3 meals a day as we're accustomed. They had 1 meal a day. And when was that 1 meal a day? When Dad came in from the field after working. When Dad finished working on a chair to sell somebody. He might have built furniture. So at the end of the day, when Mom had gotten some olives and maybe some figs and she had made some bread, at the end of the day, as the sun is beginning to set, they're going to eat their 1 meal a day to keep alive for one more day. So it's late in the day. This is a remote place. Thousands of people have not yet been fed. And what happens here is that Jesus says in response to his guys, when they say, send them away in this remote place, there's not a Costco store. There's not a Cracker Barrel where somebody can get a meal. There's not even a McDonald's. What are we going to do? And Jesus says, it's very powerful right there in verse 16, they don't need to go away. You give them something to eat. And can you imagine the panic right then and there? These 12 disciples are going to try and in that moment figure out, what are we going to do about this problem? How are we going to feed 12, 15,000 people who are hungry and they have miles to walk back to their homes? Where are we going to get food in this remote place for thousands of people? They would have begun to panic. They would have experienced fear, not courage in that moment, because of the pressure brought on them, the demands on them. Well, here's what happens. They say to Jesus, we have here only 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Remember, John, the gospel writer, he gives us the detail that Jesus turns to this little guy, this boy, and who has 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, and he borrows this Happy Meal from that boy, and he does the remarkable. You and I know that he prays, and then the food is multiplied. The food is multiplied. And remember what Jesus says. He says, bring them here to me. And he directed the people to sit down on the grass. Remember, the Gospels of Mark and so on, they tell us that they sat in groups of 50 and hundreds. Can you imagine that? Thousands of people in groups of 50s and hundreds on that hillside overlooking the Sea of Galilee. That's off the chart. Thousands of people. Now, he says, or Matthew says here that Jesus, he gave thanks, he broke the loaves, here it is, then he gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people. They all ate and were satisfied. That word satisfied in Greek, it means there wasn't room for another bite. These people were so hungry, they probably had seconds, thirds, maybe some of them even had fourths. The fish and the bread kept coming to the people. So the disciples, think about this. There was a pattern. There was a pattern that stands out. With these people eating and being satisfied, they couldn't eat another bite. What did they do? The disciples, they went to Jesus, got food, and took them to people. They went back to Jesus, got the food, and took it to the people. They went to Jesus, got the food, and took it to the people. And remember, there are 12 men on the catering crew. Only 12 guys. Maybe you've gone to a banquet, and in a banquet hall, there's been 100, 200 people, and what do they have? 30, 35 servers going around the table, filling coffee cups, filling water glasses, bringing the salad, taking the dirty dishes away. Here, they had 12 guys for 12,000 or more people. That's off the chart. Go to Jesus, get the food, take it to the people. Go to Jesus, get the food, take it to the people. And even verse 20, they all ate, they were satisfied, and the disciples picked up, here it is, 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. So they even took baskets, every one of the disciples, and they collected a basket full of leftovers per disciple. And that's kind of like an exclamation point that you and I want to see here. Jesus, he already had in mind what he was going to do. Another gospel tells us that. When this was unfolding, Jesus already had in mind what he was going to do to teach them not to fear. Don't fear. Don't panic. Don't panic when there are pressures brought upon you. No, there's a way to have courage confidently. And we see it in this recurring pattern. Remember, if something's repeated, it is important. And it's not only with regard to words, but it's with regard to actions. And here's the action. What we need for them, we get from Him. And the Him, obviously, is Jesus. That what we need for the thems in our lives, we get from Him. All too often, we panic. Whether the thems in our lives are our spouses or our children or our grandchildren. Maybe it's the people of our church. It may be that you are an elder. It might be that you are a pastor. And you and I worry about the thems in our congregation. How will I write yet another sermon? How will I put together another series? How will I put together a discipling model that matures and builds people in Jesus? How will I possibly shepherd the flock as an elder? How will I lead by example? That what we need for the thems in our life, how do we deal with this? We go immediately to Him. There's the pattern. We need to turn immediately to Jesus because with Jesus, all things are possible. And that would then stir within us courage. That would stir within us a confidence that with Jesus, all things are possible. Stop and think with me, friend. Ask yourself, who are the thems in my life? Who are the thems? And have I, rather than lie awake at night in the midst of panic and anxiety, fear-induced panic and anxiety, have I consistently and intentionally turned to Him, Jesus Christ? It's kind of like playing baseball. You hit the ball and you always run to first base. In life, no matter what challenge it is that we face, immediately, intentionally, we turn to Jesus. There's a lot going on in life right now that would instill in us fear, anxiety, panic, worry. And you and I, we are even commanded by Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, therefore, do not worry. Therefore, do not worry. Therefore, do not worry. 3 times in Matthew chapter 6, Jesus has commanded us, do not worry. Do we? Or do we not? We can have courage every dawn of every day and through every hour and moment of the dark night when you and I follow this pattern and we understand that what we need for them, we get from Him. There was a gentleman by the name of Dave Phillips. He and his wife, they stepped out in great courage and they started the Children's Hunger Fund. They lived in California and they did it in their garage. They quit their jobs and they had been on a mission trip. They were moved at the hunger of children. So what they do, they quit their jobs, they got their resources together, and they wanted to ship food and medicine to people, children in other nations. Within 6 weeks of them starting their ministry, the phone rang there in the Phillips home, and it was a pastor in the Honduras calling. He knew of 7 children who needed a particular chemotherapy to counteract the cancer that they had, childhood cancer. And he was begging Dave, come on, you can help us, please find this chemo drug that we need desperately. And Dave Phillips was overwhelmed with the request. He was just into this chair for 6 weeks. So before they hung up, Dave said, we got to pray. We have to turn to Jesus. And Dave, he prayed with the pastor on the phone for God to come through, for Jesus to be their answer. And this is what Dave says literally happened. This is back in the day when there were telephones on a desk or a tabletop with a cord attached. He said, I took the phone, I said amen, I said goodbye to the pastor, and I would call him as soon as we had any news. I hung up the phone, my hand didn't come off from it, and the phone rang. And it was a pharmaceutical company who said to me, we have 48,000 vials. 48,000 vials of this very medicine worth $8 million. And if you know of anybody who needs it, we will fly it anywhere in the world within the next 48 hours. And Dave Phillips was speechless, because in that moment, Dave Phillips, after turning to Jesus, found out that what he needed for them, he got from him. And that is what brings to you and to me courage for this day and every day ahead. Be encouraged. How grateful we are for your friendship through E2. May we be a blessing to those that Jesus makes cross our path on this day. Thanks.